Welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It is TJ, your host. This evening's discussion is going back to my college days. I remember actually it might have been high school days, when I was reading through a textbook of psychology. They had the normal subjects and chapters about such subjects, but then on the side they would have little articles or just other pieces of information that I would read, and I kept noticing that some of these were so interesting, they caught my attention more than the actual lessons in the book. I came across one particular article. It was about the human condition, not necessarily a narcissistic cluster B person, just everybody in general. We possess insecurities. We think there might be something that's not perfect in us that someone else might not like. That's the basis of this book. By the way, I'm referencing this book, which I saw a piece of in my textbook, and I sought out the actual book because that little section really sounded good. The name of the book is Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? And the author's name is John Powell. This part came from the article. He's telling you to consider the following conversation. The author, though, said to a person, "I'm writing a book. It's going to be called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am?" And the other person said, "Do you want an answer to that question?" Well, the author then said, "Well, that's the purpose of the book, to answer that question." And then the other person says, "But do you want my answer?" And the author says, "Yes, of course I do." And here it is. I am afraid to tell you who I am, because if I tell you who I am, you may not like who I am, and that is all I have. Now, you can apply this to the narcissistic personality disorder cluster B psychopath monsters. You can also apply it to young kids just getting out in the social world. It's kind of a universal concept, and maybe that's why it struck my attention, but it did because I ran out and looked for the actual book it came from and read the whole thing. He tells us that's an actual conversation that was not rehearsed, and it came in real life. That's just the introduction. The purpose of this video is to discuss the various games that people play, and I found it very fascinating to just read them all cataloged out before going into a list of a few, which will probably be spread over a few episodes. The Narcissist Bag of Tricks is probably the best place to put this, even though these games don't necessarily fit just the Cluster B monster. They could apply to anybody, but it's good to know. It helped me to understand a lot. The author, John Powell, discusses human hiding places, which he calls methods of ego defense. And he talks about the reason people play games and assume phony roles. They're ego defenses. As we've mentioned, people are very insecure. But he says briefly that these ego defenses are designed to be compensations that are cultivated to counterbalance and camouflage something inside of us of which we consider to be defective or a handicap. And again, that could apply to anybody, and how it's been common that a famous person may actually develop some kind of skill to an extraordinary degree because of the fact that they're trying to overcome some kind of handicap. Like a mile runner became a great runner trying to strengthen his legs because when he was a child, they were crippled and took away a lot of time from his life. So maybe when he became older, he decided to develop them and compensate for all that lost time. Now, a part that I found very interesting in this particular book is the 6th chapter. It's called Catalog of Games and Roles. There's no particular order in these, nor are there restrictions as far as gender or age or anything else. But the games I'm about to cover, some of, have one thing in common. No matter how different they may seem, they mask and distort the truth about the one most important thing that this author could share with you. He must ask himself, which of these games do I play? What am I seeking? What am I hiding? What am I trying to win? Well, something to keep in mind is that some of these roles and games are actually played by the Cluster B creatures. And it's very interesting when I read a few of these, because if you've had any experience with a cluster B creature, you may hear a few of these examples of specific games. Your mind will trigger to think, wait, that's how so-and-so acted at first. And then you'll hear another one and think it did that one later. And I've noticed that these cluster B creatures sometimes choose a specific game or role to play, which of course they're fake, so we know that they do that. But this is a listing of various roles. The funny thing is, though, that these cluster B creatures will try to present themselves as one of these, as if it's their personality. And because they're so void and empty inside and don't know what it means to be a real person, sometimes they'll select one of these types of games or roles I'm about to cover, and they'll say,
"Oh, well, that's just who I am. I am this person."
And you, being a thinking, intelligent person, can sometimes see it and think, well, that's a role or a game that you're playing. That's not your personality. They don't know any better, so this is for your benefit, not theirs. One of them would be all heart. Author talks about Sigmund Freud and reaction formation, which he thinks is responsible for excessively tender and sentimental concern of people. Like someone who's concerned about every little detail, which sounds a lot like the love bombing. That's what they do then. They're concerned about every little thing. If you have any kind of discomfort, oh, they're right there to fix it for you, and la la la. It states that reaction formation is thought to be responsible for the excessively tender behavior of these people. And it's an unconscious compensation for their sadistic or cruel tendencies. And that we all have cruel inclinations at times. These are people who are particularly horrified by their own. And he states one thing about compensation is that once it's set in motion, it usually ends up being overcompensation. Somehow the programming has rendered these people unable to be in touch with themselves, meaning their genuine selves. All hearters just can't ever admit to their hostile inclinations. And a lot of their energy is spent denying the truth that they cannot admit. These people are likely to be excessively tender to pets, overindulgent with children, and they always want to show excessive affection and tenderness to anyone, anywhere. These people also follow the heart in all manners, to the point that others wonder if the head is even operative at all. The heart decides everything. They can show all kinds of soft emotions, but rarely will ever report any kind of harsh emotion because they're afraid of such emotions and they must keep them repressed. Ladies are more inclined to this reaction formation because our society programs ladies to believe that hostile or cruel intentions are horrifying in a lady. The next one on the list is very fitting for the types of creatures we discuss usually. It's always right. These types of people rarely, if ever, lose an argument. Even when the evidence is stacking up against them, they salvage respect for their position somehow. They don't listen well, and they give the appearance of expecting to learn little, if anything, from anybody else. Basically, their self-esteem is threatened. And this is a result of reaction formation, and they act double certain in order to guard against demoralizing doubts that stir in their unconscious mind and tend to undermine their certainty. Their behavior, says Mr. Powell, indicates the opposite of what seems to be true. They have deep unconscious doubts about themselves and their opinions, which I've noticed that in real life, which I found this tiny little paragraph interesting. When you meet a person in real life, whether it's a teacher, a friend, anybody, when you notice them being like extremely anything, I don't even have a label for it, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be extremely friendly, it could be extremely evil, it could be any number of things, but this little section tells us what I found to be true, at least in my experience. Example would be somebody pretends to be religious and quotes Bible verses all day, every day, and talks about that all the time. That same person, it turns out, when nobody's around, is out doing satanic sacrifices of children or some kind of evil behavior that would never be accepted by the general public, but they cover it up with their religious behavior when they're in public. So if you know anybody who's extremely anything, consider the fact that the real person underneath that mask may actually be the exact opposite of what they're showing you. Next on the list would be the flirt. The flirting game is basically an attempt to gain for the ego some kind of recognition. And it's usually played by people who have never ever cultivated any kind of real emotional depth, which could be a cluster B monster. The author tells us that only deeper relationships can result in security for the ego. Such relationships effect this security by promoting better self-knowledge and self-acceptance. Flirts, however, refuse to take this gamble of these more self-revealing relationships. They just keep on running. Now, the flirtation's possible only when the emotions are superficial. Though nobody wants to admit this about their emotions, stable and deep human relationships can never be built on such things. The flirting game also assumes that when one tires of one conquest, they can run off to the next one. This is, of course, a very selfish kind of sport, but it ties nicely into the Cluster B Monsters lifestyle. And there are many injuries in this kind of situation. And nobody wants to admit to being a flirt or to playing any one of the games listed in this book, but it's the first step to real emotional growth when we actually admit the tendency that we may have to play these games in order to hold it into some kind of check. The author states that in all these games, we must ask ourselves, what is it we really want? Why do we want it? Which will always tell us something about ourselves. And why would it be better to give up our game? While flirting may bring some passing gratifications to the ego, little fleeting infatuations often complicate our lives considerably. They lead us into subterfuges, having to make up excuses, lies, and being preoccupied with ourselves. Sexual and emotional development starts with narcissism. They say self-fascination in the child, but with growth as a person, one should become more and more capable of altruism, which is the love for others. The flirting people have been somehow fixated in an adolescent self-centered state, and their growth has been arrested. Okay, so the last one for this particular video will be inflammable. Handle with caution. The author tells us it's very difficult for many of us to believe, but people who have short fuses and give forth loud noises many times are reacting to some supposed grievance. But the supposed grievance is not what's really bothering these people, as they cannot openly discuss the real source of their anger. They are simply letting off their steam, and their explosions can rarely be taken at face value. What's smoldering in their unconscious mind is a buried hostility. People are usually much more hostile than they realize. We usually repress our real resentment because the society we live in has conditioned all of us and programmed us to believe that being hostile is not becoming, and it's not something that a socialized human being would show. He mentions that Carl Menninger in Love Against Hate describes the chain reaction of parents that have hidden hostilities, which frustrate their children. They build them up into even more repressed hostilities. Then the children grow up into frustrated parents, who in turn frustrate themselves and their children. More hostilities! The first step in breaking this chain reaction cycle is you must recognize the sources and extent of our aggression and hostility, of which are many times unconscious. They are hidden or repressed because we're led to feel that we can't be angry, especially at our own parents who have done so much for us. Now, after we recognize the true source of hostility, we need to try to neutralize these recognized resentments by deepening our understanding or by releasing them in non-destructive ways, like an athletic competition, running down the block, lifting some weights. It also helps to talk them out. Meanwhile, we should be aware that we're often most inflammable with those we love because it's usually against them that we bear the most hostility, since our dealings with them have been longer and more intense.
I don't know what to do.
I am the narcopath, and I'm supposed to be giving you some more confessions tonight, But before I do, I figured I would ask you one question. Question hasn't been bothering me, but TJ's forcing me to come up with these goddamn confessions and told me to think about things that might have upset you during our time together. And I know whenever we were dating, you always seemed to make such a big deal about something I lied about. And I'm here to ask you, what is your damage? What is the big deal? So what if I told a lie? It's not like you've never lied before, is it? You've lied. Now never mind, when I met you, you asked if I was seeing anybody, and I wanted to be with you for the night because my hearts were wanting it. I told you I was single. So what? Big deal. It got you in my bedroom, didn't it? That's all that matters. Who cares if later you found out that I just happened to still be involved with my ex? That was none of your concern. You didn't need to know that. My pussy willow needed to be recharged. That's the bottom line. If I would have told you that I had a lover who was out of town for the moment, do you think that would have gone over pretty well for you? I don't think so. So what? I lied. It's not the end of the world. You got to experience me. And all that stuff you used to say about you felt betrayed because I lied. I think you live in a different world. To me, a lie means getting what I want. Now to you, I don't know what it means because you act like you're so against lying. I was mirroring you and acting like I felt the same about lying, but you clearly saw that my whole vocabulary is devoted to lying. I don't get it. If you can get what you want through a lie, then why would you tell the truth? I don't understand that. Maybe you do, and you know something I don't. But I don't get it.
And again, I know I'm supposed to be the one confessing, but I still have questions. Why did it matter if I lied to you? If I was giving you access to my pussy willow, why did it matter what I did when you weren't there? Were you trying to control me? Is that it? Well, you didn't need to know that I was carrying on another affair behind your back because you wouldn't let me live with you. So I figured I could do whatever I wanted, and you did not need to know. So why did you get so upset when you finally found out the truth from someone else? I don't get it. Lying is a way to get things. It's a currency. If you expected me to tell you the truth, then we probably wouldn't have even lasted more than one half date. I have to lie, or I won't have anything. Don't hold that against me. I was maintaining 2 relationships at the same time, plus another one that neither of you knew about. And it's what I need to be happy. You just don't understand. That's why I couldn't tell you. You see, if I would have told you, you'd react like you used to react when you'd catch me out with other men, and I think, see, you're so paranoid. That other man I just met at church, he gave me a ride home. I fell asleep by accident at his house. Who cares if my private parts were ripped up and my hair was disheveled? Well, we were praying to Jesus, and I was feeling the Spirit. I wasn't doing anything wrong.
Or was I? Hi. Welcome to Transgender Cruise Line. I'm Lola Lust, your sexy hostess.
As long as you're transgendered, step on up.
Walk right in.
If you by chance are in the wrong place, well, the exit's over there. Don't waste our time.
Excuse me. Those of you who are laughing at my wardrobe malfunction, you all can get off the boat now. I'm serious. Get the hell off this goddamn boat. We don't need your kind here. We are a people of tolerance and love. And if you don't want to be a transgender, get the fuck out here too. Oh.